We can begin with a question, which is a little bit more open.
We are going to discuss not the question.
Yeah, but to discuss about the theme, is being an artist a profession or beruf, or is it, and why, or is it not, and why not? I would like to know what's your opinion about it.
Mm-hmm. Start with me.
I'm going to pass it over to you because I think that's maybe something I would talk too long about, so I kind of want to pass it. Because
so you're saying I'm going to be small, short?
No, but maybe you'll get less angry or something. I think yeah.
I don't know. I try to stick to the point that it is profession because I want to feel it like that. You know, even it's hard to say it's so easy for us because sometimes it's also very personal and we kind of are very emotionally involved into what we do and how we react and you know. So, but in the end, I stick to the point that it is profession because I study that. I try to be professional as much as I can in that direction. And then I also want to earn in the end with that because I don't want to work something else to earn money and then with this only to do as a hobby because in the end it's not my hobby too. So what it is, you know. So I kind of want to escape from this uncomfortable situation that we artists often we have this, then we can't so easily say, yeah, I'm an artist, you know, before waiting somebody else to say it for us, you know. Mm-hmm. So there's some kind of twisted situation, you know, but still I would like to make it kind of clear, yeah, you know, it is for me profession. And I try to be professional as much as I can. And how personal it is and how emotional I'm involved, then it's something else that comes after, you know.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this, yeah, I'm an artist, and that reminded me, I mean, I guess there are different perspectives. On the one hand, people who are not connected to the cultural scene or industry at all say things like, oh, you're an artist, yeah, but what do you really do?
What again?
But what do you really do?
Ah, yeah.
Like, yeah, that's great. I'm an artist too. I have a nice garden. So that's maybe one joke to depart from. On a more serious note, I would say you have these kind of two perspectives of art is life and life is art, and this kind of Boysian school of trying to include everything under this one umbrella and this kind of experiential process. At the same time, you have a more clear division, which I think in our current political economy we need to take into consideration, because it is very desirable to have people working without contracts, people working without security, and everything being undefined and ultimately flexible. So if you are working on a project and you work 100 hours, but it's considered just some sort of output, which is abstract and then calculated in the end by who knows whom, you know, it's a 20-minute video, so I guess it's this amount of money. But it doesn't matter if you were hungry for 3 years. I think that these are serious constraints which we need to look at before we take these personal things into consideration, because considering the austerity measures and what's happening in the cultural industry, if we do not look at it as a profession, we will disappear. Or, you know, go hungry, because it's simply being cut and cut and cut out of every sector.
You think you're getting cut, because on the other hand you have, you mentioned culture industry, but on the one hand the part of the culture industry which is engaged and mixed with the politics of the city and the space. Art world, so-called art world, it's making a big role also in all that.
It's true, yeah. Maybe I should backtrack and re-articulate. Critical art, critical political art is disappearing. Art which is used to fuel a kind of machinery which then goes back to this exploitative machine, and which in effect actually re-articulates itself and limits itself not to be able to create any critique anymore. That's of course very much supported. So anything which will create, the European City of Culture project, that's a huge thing. That's of course going to get plenty of money and fuel a lot of big gentrification processes at the same time. So while on the one hand a lot of artists are getting very rich who are investing into that, they are making their fellow artists poor who are then gentrified through the process, because a lot of these spaces are very much artist-occupied or migrant-occupied poorer areas. So yes, for sure, you're right, and it's small details in terms of political positioning. Yeah.
You put it out the distinction between the critical art and the art which is made. Maybe that's also for both question. To make a critical art, I don't want to make that as a provocative question, but making a critical art, what do you mean with a critical art? And why is that so important? And from which point of view it's different from, let's say, tradable art?
I talked for a long time.
I don't know, for me it's like I always try to analyze what I do. And when I talk about art, to talk about art, what I do and how I see it. So in that one I would not make a difference between critical art and art, but if you want to see it further, that the trade art or more, then you want a difference or what again?
For example, as Lina said, that critical art will disappear if we don't call ourselves professional artists because of all the processes of recuperation of art in the system of capitalistic production.
Well, maybe I should say something really fast, because now I realize that it might again sound, maybe I was simplifying too much, but not to say that it'll disappear, but it'll disappear with public representation. Of course, it will never die. It's not that people will stop thinking or working.
It will disappear from the public space. And I think that's also very important.
If become a profession.
No, if we don't claim and demand the space to be called professionals and to, to kind of occupy a sphere of the economy or the politics, then, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I cannot still make the difference. For me, it's like, that can happen in every kind of profession. So it's like, depends how critical you are and how much then you can be in the public or not, So it's like in every sphere, it can happen in art as well. It happens even more directly, because art starts with the idea that it's not made for money and it's not made for, the mass or something. But then when it goes in the mass and mainstream, that's like the risk, but it's like everything else. I just see it like that.
But don't you think that art should be made for mass?
It's
not for...
No, it starts with the idea that I don't do art for money and I don't do art for mass, It's like the beginning of point when you start producing or trying to execute the idea into the material, But then if it goes further, it's like why we should not leave it and see what can happen, And maybe that's a form of also being more directly intertwined in the historical condition of what's going on in the society more directly, Am I clear?
Lina? You pointed out the critical art and vanishing of critical art in public space. My question is also how important it is and why to make something what is today called altogether critical art.
It's maybe also
what does it mean also for you and through your work and through your personal also experience in the art world and in life also.
Yeah, I mean, it's, while I think maybe it's one of the more political questions that you ask, I think I'd answer it more personally than most of the others. And it's also important to say that there's a big market for critical art as well, that it's also, depends what this critique is of it, what time, how radical it is, so that's also to be specifically defined. So that aside, without now going into detail in terms of which regime is critiqued in which way and how neoliberal capitalism can appropriate just about anything, including critique, and just about loves all of that aside, I mean, why it's important to me or what my experience would be, I mean, without now sounding like I'm telling some sad biography or something, I think that at least, maybe now from a kind of objective description, in these situations of transition, in situations of migration, in the changing landscape that we live in, particularly if someone's moving, sometimes moving between space is almost a bit like moving through time as well, and not to speak from an old classical kind of undeveloped or, this kind of time, but in terms of the speed at which time is changing in transitional places versus others, and just to see how these things are happening in parallel. I suppose in some situations these things can be ignored. I see it happening every day, but at least I wasn't able to afford the situation where I could, and simply had to confront these realities and had to understand them, because without understanding them I couldn't, find a way to get a job in a semi-legal or whatever situation. And so you need to research, and then research becomes part of your lifestyle, and then you start wondering, what the hell am I doing? I'm trying to study, or I'm trying to practice art, or whatever position you're in at that time. And it becomes dominated with other processes, and you realize you're completely exploited, and you don't have time for other things, and you don't know if it should now, if this system is kicking you out, like through these other, if you're not desirable for it, that you get kicked out, or if you can somehow then reappropriate this. And somehow I guess that was the strategy that I used, to use all of these issues and the knowledge that I was gaining just to get past them, to actually express them and try to then join with other individuals and kind of go past this isolation that a person ends up in these struggles, and join different collectives, so to deal with other migrants, other people at universities who are dealing with austerity cuts and facing different problems, and various different struggles that are connected, and try to actually teach each other and organize different cultural or educational contexts, events. And so that for me is where my, position is in art making or text making or whatever, to somehow intervene into something I think is necessary, at least myself.